Hey everybody, it's Bamboo Bandit bringing you another update video on Bridgebourn. A few months back, I wanted to make a high production value cinematic for a good first impression with people playing the game. I wanted it to have detailed animation, every frame painted, and with an onboarding script to tell everyone what the story was, and with a professional narrator. Recently I got around to completing this project, and you can see the finished product in a previous video linked below. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the technical and artistic process involved behind the production of it, and yeah, let's get into this. So the first step was I had to make a storyboard just to know what the animation was going, what direction it would take, what story it was going to tell. And funnily enough, I usually don't plan these kinds of things. Like, I don't have a game design document for Bridgebourn, so it was a miracle that I made a storyboard. I'm usually just operating off of vibes purely alone. Thank you, ADHD. So I drew a few panels up and then I wrote a script to go along with it. Next step, I had to animate this storyboard using a software called Adobe Animate, previously known as Flash. I actually had a lot of experience using Flash when I was a kid, so I was able to leverage some of that and make this step, which took me around 20 hours. I tried my best to make smooth animation here. I didn't really use any keyframes, I just kept adding more frames again. Like I was saying before, just vibes. Typically, I operate in a do not think fashion. It seems to be the best method for just how I am and how I function. Also, I got a lot of inspiration from other animation that I've been seeing over the years, especially recently, scenes from Jujutsu Kaisen Season 2. There's just some really sick animations in there, and yeah, just fueled my desire to just go really hard on this and try to make the best animation that I could. With this step of the outline being done, I read the script back, roughly timed with a way to see if it lined up with the scenes. With this recording, I was able to tweak some scene timings just to get everything to align with each other. Then this brings us to step 3, Photoshop animation. So Photoshop does have an animation functionality. It is pretty obtuse, I think, but it's usable. So this step was maybe took me around 70 hours, by far the longest part. That's just a rough guess. I wasn't really timing myself or anything. But I had to export the flash frames and import them to Photoshop basically manually. There are ways to import a flash project automatically to Photoshop, but I had issues with the way it did this. Basically, I had to make layer groups for each frame to comfortably add in effects and layers. There was like a lot of going back and forth on the frames to keep the brush strokes looking consistent when I was filling them in. And that was basically what I was doing with this step, was filling in the outline from Adobe Animate and giving everything more textures. Preventing inconsistencies in the texture per frame was tedious and time consuming, but I think it was worth it to keep that unique hand-painted look that I don't really find in animation commonly, just because it is really tedious to do. And yeah, I learned the hard way. And what I mean by that is, like, when you go from one frame, you see this texture going a certain direction, like a stroke, and then the next frame, and then the next frame. If those strokes don't smoothly transition, then it looks really janky when you play it in. The parallax scenes were particularly challenging. Even though the animation here is relatively simple, with reused textures in each frame, basically it's the same textures being moved each frame. Each different layer had to be moved in a consistent percentage of movement to give a feeling of depth. That was the issue. So, objects in the distance have to move just a little bit, and objects close to the camera have to move much more. And each frame, this movement has to be consistent. And this could only really be done in Photoshop utilizing their scripting capabilities, which that's a big reason why I even use Photoshop to this day. Of course, it's a great drawing tool and has tons of tools that I love, but the scripting is just really helpful for really complex pipelines, even for just an animation. So in these parallax scenes, I had to give the layer groups a naming scheme for the script to leverage, basically. I had to write a Photoshop script that, when run, a prompt comes up and will ask you how much X and Y I want to move the layers in a particular frame. Then it will divvy out the percentages of movement based on the depth metadata of the layer name, and then it will merge the results for convenience. So this step was pretty tedious, but I had to manually run the script per frame basically, to get this parallax scene to work. I couldn't really think of any other way to do it. Eventually, I got my final animation result, and I was stoked. But to tie it all together, I needed sounds and professional voice acting. I ended up using a lot of sounds from Bridgebourn itself to speed up the process. I found a lot of fitting sounds, like for example, the player climbing up the cliff in the first scene of the cinematic is the same sound as when dust falls from the ceiling in the Pari introduction when they drop down from the ceiling. It makes it sound like you're actually climbing a cliff and sand is falling everywhere. I was a bit concerned with aligning the professional voice acting with the animation in terms of timing, especially since I never worked with a voice actor before, but I reached out to Joshua Tomar, and he was the narrator for this, and he did a wonderful job. I managed to fit his voice files relatively comfortably over the animation, but it needed a few timing tweaks to get everything to align, so I had to prolong some scenes, make some animations slower, and in the end, things were fitting quite well. Finally, I'm left with a finished cinematic that I'm really happy with. It was the most ambitious animation yet, and I was always fantasizing about making a detailed, frame-by-frame, painted animation outside of Bridgebourn asset files, because I'm doing a lot of that in the game, but nothing like this scope. It made me think about the possibility of making even more cinematics for Bridgebourn, like maybe for key points in the story. I'd like to optimize my workflow a bit more here, but I think it would add a lot to the game. Also, I really want to make a fight sequence one day. I think that would be so cool. Other than that, what else is new with Bridgebourn? Well, I'm currently working on a secret feature for both the game and the demo, and I'm really excited about it. I got a lot of requests to add this, and I can't wait to show y'all when I'm done. It will be pretty soon. I'm basically wrapping up loose ends for this feature, and it's going to be sick. And in the last video, I announced the launch of my Patreon page. You can help support the game that way, or by wishlisting the Steam page, or liking this video, subscribing to the YouTube channel, of course. No pressure on the Patreon. It's there just that, if you just wanted to do something. As always, though, thank you for watching, and stay tuned for future updates.